Ooh, did I scare you? Well, hopefully just a little. It is Halloween after all. And I said that very last part because, if I'm honest with you, I'm not the biggest Halloween fan. After about my teenage years, the allure kind of wore off and it just turned into an excuse to stay up late and eat lots of candy. And that includes these bad boys, candy corn, some of my absolute favorites. If you have a problem with candy corn, I honestly don't know what to tell you. You've probably just had the wrong ones. But while candy is indeed a big highlight of Halloween, the other reason why people celebrate it is due to the fact that they get to wear a costume. It's one of the few days a year where people actually take time to dress up and pretend to be someone or something else for a night. Which is kind of funny because as someone who is a furry and has a fursuit, I get to do that all the time. Though at the same time, I personally wouldn't relegate this fursuit to something like a random costume. This is a custom-made, wearable piece of art that represents my identity in the furry fandom. But despite that high level of importance I just gave them, in reality, fursuits actually do a pretty poor job at truly representing the furry fandom. So I thought for this Halloween, we explored that idea a little bit. Let's go over why furries have fursuits, how they actually misrepresent the furry fandom more than it may seem, and why despite that, they are still so highly regarded both in and out of this fandom. It should be a fun one, but first, a quick snack. Ugh, God, I love candy corn. Okay, let's get into it. Let's talk about fursuits, these bright, furry, wearable costumes. Of course, I was being a bit flippant earlier, but I did mean it when I mentioned that fursuits are a little bit more special than costumes. If we look at a comparison between the two, costumes or similarly made mascots are typically mass-produced and designed for anyone to be able to perform in. Now, that's not to say that they can't be well-designed or even good-looking. And no, we're not going to explore my feelings about this one in particular at this time. But the biggest difference between them and something like a fursuit is that they represent something completely separate from the individual actually performing in them. This is in stark contrast to fursuits, which are designed literally from the ground up to represent the person wearing them. This is why fursuits are typically completely custom made, from the design and colors to the fur to even being physically tailored to fit the body of the one commissioning it. Fursuits are much more personal and individualistic than something like a costume, which is meant to represent someone or something not related to the owner at all. So then, why did I throw that line in the intro saying that they do a poor job of representing the furry fandom? Isn't that what being a furry is all about? Creating anthropomorphic animal characters that are meant to represent who we are or who we want to be? Well, yes, that statement is very true. But when you start to tie that idea with the concept of fursuit so tightly to the point where a fursuit almost acts as a requirement to actually realize those characters, that's where things start to get a bit misrepresentative. For starters, not everyone in this fandom has a fursuit. That probably seems obvious, but it's actually a lot less than you probably think. According to most studies of furries and the fandom, only about 15% of furries actually own a fursuit, meaning for every 100 furries you come across, statistically, 85 of them won't have a fursuit. And there are a number of reasons for this, highlighted by their extremely high cost. It's no secret how expensive these custom art pieces can be. In fact, their rising costs tends to be a point of discourse in this fandom quite often. But that also assumes that everyone in this fandom wants to have a fursuit, and that's not the case either. I'll be honest with you all here, owning one of these isn't all sunshine and rainbows all the time. This thing is very impractical to travel with, and I just have a plantigrade suit. I can't imagine having to deal with all the padding with a digitigrade suit. These things are also super high maintenance, from having to brush them constantly to washing them, which isn't nearly as simple as tossing them in the washing machine with your colors and a couple of Tide Pods. Oh, and I almost forgot, these things can be pretty hot to wear. I'm actually in a pretty privileged position where I have a super high heat tolerance, so unless it's like already 90 degrees outside and in straight sunlight, I barely sweat in here. But I can guarantee you that's not the case for everyone who owns a suit. And for some, the heat or the claustrophobia of wearing something like this that encloses their entire head in, or the worsening of vision that may occur when looking through these perforated eyes, all of that might making owning a suit a non-starter. And again, I will stress this until I'm blue in the face, which I just realize is not the best figure of speech since I'm pretty much already there, but anyway, you don't need to have a fursuit in order to be a furry. They are the ultimate nice to have in this fandom, not must have, and those who can't or don't want one already know that. Yet despite all those negatives, many furries still have them, and they are still seen as a want for a lot of people in this fandom. And most critically, they are the furry fandom's most visual identifier. there. But why exactly is that? Why do furries love fursuits so much, and what makes them so special for those both in and out of the furry fandom? Well, like most things in life, there are actually many different reasons. Let's start with some more pragmatic ones. These things are legitimate pieces of art, and they look fantastic. And I know that second part is technically subjective, but come on. Other than a few extremely rare exceptions, I challenge you to find a fursuit that looks objectively awful. And not for nothing, it's perfectly normal to want to own a piece of art that is pleasing to the eye. And the great thing about this piece of art is I could move inside of it, and that animation really adds a special allure to these suits. Speaking of moving around in them, wearing a fursuit can be seen as a performing art. I don't know if you noticed, but when I talk about the art of moving around in fursuit, I typically don't just call it fursuiting and usually say performing in fursuit. That's because for me and many other furries in suit, fursuiting is a performance. We are literally acting out our characters in this suit. Now, some people take that idea and run with it. I know people who act completely different in their suit than in real life, down to the tone of their voice. And some take it even further than that and perform in suit without saying any words at all, which apparently is how it used to be done back in the day. But for a lot of fursuiters, they use their suit as a way to perform other performing arts like music or acting or dancing. That last one being a more recent genre of fursuit performances that has really taken off. But even with those two very valid reasons, probably the biggest reason why furries love fursuits is that they physically embody our personas and essentially bring them to life. Now, we've explored the idea of how important personas are to many people's identities in this fandom before, and how furries use them as ways to idealize their ideal selves. And for those who can, getting a fursuit allows them to take that idea and materialize it in the physical world, allowing that individual to actually act as their persona. This gets a little bit tricky to explain, but I mean it when I say that I'm technically acting in here. The confidence in my voice, the overall more lively and positive nature, heck, even how animated I am with my arms and my paws. That's all still rather unnatural to me, but is a part of my persona that I eventually want to embody myself. In fact, I'll give you the best example of this for me. In real life, I actually don't like hugs and really don't hug anyone, not even my family. But that's something I definitely want to change, and when I'm in suit, I'm actively working on first learning to like them and be okay with that amount of close physical contact, as well as giving good hugs myself. So if you ever meet me at a convention or see me while I'm in suit, please ask for a hug. It'll actually be good practice for me. And we are just scratching the surface of why furries love fursuits and why they are so coveted in this fandom. I didn't even go over the fact that these things draw a lot of attention, which is something a lot of people like. But after going through that thought exercise of understanding why, it's not so confusing anymore as to why these are seen as so representative of the fandom, despite not many people in the fandom actually having one. For all intents and purposes, they are the most visually representative way of describing what being a furry is all about, and specifically what our personas mean to our identity. It's no wonder that when you talk to normies about the furry fandom, they instantly make that connection between being a furry and having a fursuit, despite those two ideas being completely separate. And while both you and I know that's definitely not the case, I don't know if there is anything better suited to explain the magic of what being a furry can bring than fursuits. Alright, that's been it. Just a quick one so I don't take up all of your Halloween night, but this is actually part 1 of a 2-part series that I'm doing on fursuits. Next week is actually the 6-month anniversary of me owning this suit, and the next video will be a more detailed explanation of the more practical side of what it's like owning a fursuit. So definitely stay tuned for that. November in general is going to be a fun month for content, so make sure you like and subscribe and follow me on all the socials so you don't miss any of it. But yeah, that's it for this one. Thanks again for watching. I'll catch you in the next one, but until then, stay wild out there. Peace. All right, let's get back to my candy corn. Oh, dropped it.